My mother-in-law sat across from me in my own conference room and told me to smile more. That was 3 years before everything fell apart. 3 years before I found out what kind of people I had married into. But that moment, that particular Tuesday afternoon when she adjusted her pearl earring and said, "You know, Vivian, men like my son need a wife who brightens the room, not one who's always buried in work." That was when I should have listened to the part of me that already knew. I didn't listen. I was 27. I was in love, and I thought love was enough to build a life on. His name was… well, it doesn't matter what his name was. I call him my ex-husband now, and that's the only title he deserves. We met in law school. He was charming the way certain people are charming. Effortlessly, strategically, like breathing. He laughed at my jokes before I finished telling them. He remembered small things. He made me feel like I was the most interesting person in any room we walked into together. We got married when I was 26. It was a beautiful wedding. I paid for half of it because his family was going through a transition. That was the phrase my mother-in-law used. Transition. I would learn later that transition meant his father had made a series of catastrophic investment decisions and the family was quietly drowning. But they kept the house and the cars and the appearances because appearances were the one currency they refused to spend. My family wasn't wealthy. My parents were schoolteachers. They scraped together what they could for my wedding gift, a check for $8,000, folded inside a card my mother had cried over while writing. My father shook my husband's hand and said, "Take care of my daughter." My husband smiled and said, "Always." The first year of marriage was fine. The second year was when things began to shift in ways too subtle to name. He started coming home later. He stopped asking about my cases. When I got a promotion at the firm where I was working, he took me to dinner and spent most of it on his phone. When I mentioned it, he said I was being sensitive. I told myself this was normal. I told myself all marriages went through adjustments. His family was always present in a way I hadn't anticipated. My mother-in-law came over without calling. His sister. I'll call her what she was, which is someone who smiled at me with her teeth and never her eyes, had opinions about everything. How I decorated the apartment. How I dressed for family dinners. How I hadn't given them a grandchild yet, a niece or nephew yet, as if my body were a project they had collectively decided to manage. I was 30 when I found the account. I wasn't looking for it. I was handling our taxes that year because my husband said he was slammed at work. I was going through the financial documents and I found a savings account I didn't know existed, attached to a routing number I didn't recognize. Over 4 years, just under $60,000 had moved through that account, moved through it and out of it, into accounts I didn't recognize. I sat at our kitchen table for a long time after that. I didn't confront him that night. I am a lawyer. I know that the worst thing you can do when you discover something is show your hand before you understand what you're looking at. I made copies of everything. I contacted an attorney friend, not at my firm, someone I trusted from law school, and I started to understand what I was dealing with. What I was dealing with was this. My husband had been systematically moving money out of our joint finances for almost 4 years. Some of it went to a separate account he'd opened alone. Some of it went to his parents. Some of it, and this took me longer to trace, and I wish I were wrong, but I'm not, went to a woman he had been seeing since the second year of our marriage. The math of it was almost clinical in how complete it was. By the time I understood the full picture, he and his family had moved approximately $90,000 out of assets that were partially mine. That included money from a joint investment account I had contributed to heavily during the years I was making more than him. That included the $8,000 my parents gave us as a wedding gift. That included a small inheritance I had received when my grandmother passed away. $15,000 she had saved over decades of working as a seamstress. My grandmother's hands had made that money, stitch by stitch, and it was gone. I filed for divorce on a Thursday morning in March. I did not tell him it was coming. My attorney sent the papers to his office, which I knew would embarrass him, and I am not sorry about that. What followed was 18 months of the ugliest legal process I have ever been part of, and I have seen ugly legal processes. His family hired an attorney and tried to claim that certain assets were gifts to him, specifically, not to us jointly. My mother-in-law submitted a declaration saying I had been a difficult and ungrateful daughter-in-law who had driven a wedge between her son and his family. His sister gave a deposition in which she implied, with careful wording, that I had been emotionally unstable throughout the marriage. I kept working. I showed up to the office every day. I handled my cases. I did not fall apart, though there were nights, many of them, when I sat on the floor of my bathroom because it was the one room in the apartment I felt like was only mine, and I let myself feel everything I hadn't let myself feel during the day. When the divorce was finalized, I had less than I should have had. The law does what it can, but asset concealment is difficult to prove to the standard required, and my husband's family had been careful. I recovered some of it. Not all. I took what I had and I started over. I was 32 years old, with a law degree, 7 years of litigation experience, and enough anger to fuel something, if I could point it in the right direction. I pointed it toward building. I had always wanted to open my own firm. During the marriage, that dream had gotten quieter and quieter, not because my husband had said anything specific against it, but because the atmosphere of the marriage made big ambitions feel somehow inappropriate. His family operated on the premise that I should be grateful for what I had. Wanting more was, in their framing, a kind of ingratitude. I stopped being grateful for the wrong things. The first 2 years were brutal, I won't pretend otherwise. I rented a single office in a shared space, took any case that came through the door, and worked hours that would have been illegal if I were billing them to someone else. I had one paralegal, a young woman named Rosalind who has since become one of the sharpest legal minds I know, and we built the practice case by case. There were months where I wasn't sure I could make payroll. There were nights I considered going back to a firm, taking a comfortable salary, letting the dream compress itself into something manageable. And then I would think about that kitchen table. I would think about my grandmother's hands, and I would go back to work. By the end of my 3rd year, I had 6 attorneys on staff and a reputation in the city for family law, specifically financial disputes and divorce proceedings. I was good at it for obvious reasons. I knew what the other side looked like from the inside. I knew every trick because I had watched those tricks used against me. I didn't think about my ex-husband's family much anymore. I had moved through the anger into something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly, but indifference, which felt more like freedom than forgiveness ever would have. And then they walked into my office. Not all of them. Just my mother-in-law and his sister. My assistant, her name is Priscilla, and she has worked for me for 2 years and is extraordinarily good at her job, came to my door and said a Mrs. and Miss with my ex-husband's family surname were in the waiting room and did not have an appointment, but were asking if I had time to see them. I remember looking at Priscilla for a moment. I remember the particular quality of the light in my office that afternoon, very yellow and low, the way it gets in late autumn. "Give me 5 minutes," I said, "then bring them in." I used those 5 minutes to pull up everything I remembered about the last time I had spoken to either of them, which was in a courtroom hallway, and my mother-in-law had looked at me and said, "You'll regret this." His sister hadn't said anything. She'd just looked at me with that same smile, teeth only. I had not regretted it. I had, in fact, experienced the opposite of regret. They came in and they looked smaller somehow. My mother-in-law had aged significantly. She was still put together in the way she'd always been, the kind of put together that costs money and effort and signals both, but there was something worn about it now, like a coat that had been dry cleaned one too many times. His sister sat slightly behind her, which I found interesting. She had always been the sharper of the two, the one who drove decisions while appearing to follow. My mother-in-law said it was good to see me. I said nothing. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings, that these things were always complicated, that she hoped I understood. I waited. She said they were coming to me because they trusted me, because despite everything, they knew I was the best at what I did. And what they needed. Her voice dropped slightly here, took on a note I recognized as performance. Was someone who could help them with a very delicate situation. His father had died 8 months ago. I had not known this. He had died owing a great deal of money to a great many people, and the estate was now the subject of multiple competing claims. The family home, the one I had been brought to for dinners, the one I had sat in while being told to smile more, the one they had maintained through all those years of quiet drowning, was now potentially subject to forced sale. We need someone who can protect what's ours, my mother-in-law said. I took a breath. I appreciate you coming in, I said. Can I ask, did you look up my firm specifically, or were you referred by someone? My mother-in-law said a mutual acquaintance had mentioned my name, that they'd looked up my firm and read about the work I'd done. So you knew it was my firm when you came in, I said. She said yes, of course. Then you'll understand that I need to be transparent with you about something, I said. There's a conflict of interest issue here that I need to think through carefully. Given our prior relationship and the prior legal proceedings, I may not be the appropriate attorney for your case. His sister leaned forward slightly. The smile was gone. We thought about that, she said. We actually think it works in our favor. You know this family. You know the history. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. That sentence. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. I thought about a courtroom hallway. I thought about a declaration my mother-in-law had submitted calling me difficult and ungrateful. I thought about the $8,000 my parents had folded into a card. I thought about my grandmother's hands. Tell me more about what you're looking for, I said. They laid it out over the next 40 minutes. The estate was a mess, significant debt, disputed assets, two creditors with judgments already in place. But there was also a piece of property attached to the estate that had appreciated substantially in value over the past decade. If it could be protected from the creditors' claims, the family could sell it voluntarily and walk away with a meaningful amount, maybe enough to maintain a different but still comfortable life. What they wanted me to do was find a legal mechanism to shield that property. I listened to all of it. Then I asked my mother-in-law to give me a moment and asked Priscilla to bring in a file I had been keeping updated for the past several months. Because here is the thing I have not mentioned yet, I had known about the estate proceedings. Not because I was watching them specifically, but because 3 years ago when I was building the practice, I had done a quiet analysis of distressed real estate assets in the city. Properties with complicated ownership situations, estates in probate, assets likely to come to market under pressure. It was a legitimate investment strategy, the kind any decent financial advisor might suggest. And one of the properties I had identified and subsequently made an offer on through a holding company, a clean, legal, arm's-length transaction that the estate administrator had approved during the probate process, was the very property my mother-in-law was now sitting in my office asking me to protect. I owned it. Had owned it for 4 months. The file Priscilla brought in contained the documentation. I set it on the desk between us and I let them look at it. The color left my mother-in-law's face in a way I had never seen happen to a person before. It was very quiet and very complete. His sister said, "Is this?" and then stopped. The transaction was handled through proper probate channels, I said. The administrator was authorized to sell. Everything was done correctly. You knew, his sister said. I identified the asset as part of a broader investment analysis, I said. I didn't know at the time of purchase that you had come to my office. I didn't engineer this meeting. You chose to come here. My mother-in-law's voice when she found it was very thin. We came here because we needed help. I know, I said. And what, you're going to use this against us? After everything, you're going to hold this over us? I looked at her for a long moment. I'm not going to do anything, I said. I own the property. It's mine. The sale was legal. There's nothing to use against you because there's no leverage here. That implies I need something from you. I don't. So what happens to us? She said. It was the first time I had ever heard her ask a question that sounded real. Not performed. Not strategic. Just real. That's not my question to answer, I said, as gently as I could. And I meant the gentleness. I was not cruel in that moment. I had no interest in cruelty. I can give you a referral to a colleague who handles estate litigation and doesn't have a conflict of interest. They may find other options you haven't considered. The situation isn't necessarily hopeless. But the property is mine, I said. Yes. His sister stood up. She was holding her composure, but it was costing her. You have to understand how this looks. After our family's history with you, I understand exactly how it looks, I said. I've understood for several years how things look from different positions. That was a valuable education. They left. My mother-in-law did not say it was good to see me this time. I sat in my office after they were gone and I looked out the window at the city for a while. I wasn't triumphant. That's not the right word for what I felt. I wasn't vindicated exactly. I had built the thing I built because I needed to build it, not because I was imagining this moment. The moment had simply arrived. The way things do when you have been moving in a direction long enough. What I felt was something closer to complete. I thought about my grandmother. About the particular kind of patience that comes from working with your hands. The patience that understands you cannot rush what you're making. You can only keep the tension right and let the work accumulate. I had been doing that. For years, without knowing the shape of what I was making, I had been keeping the tension right. I called my parents that evening. My mother answered, and I could hear my father in the background asking who it was. "It's me," I told her. "I just wanted to say hello. I wanted to tell you I'm okay." "You sound good," my mother said. "I am," I told her. And for the first time in a long time, I said it without needing it to become true. It already was. There are things I want to say to anyone who is somewhere in the middle of what I went through. Not at the beginning, not at the end, but in that long, difficult middle where you can't see the shape of it yet. The people who take from you are counting on your belief that you cannot rebuild. Every calculation they make is based on that assumption. They drain resources and they undermine confidence and they surround you with a version of yourself that is smaller than you are, and they need you to believe that version is the real one. It isn't. What I know now is that I was never the person they told me I was. I was always the person I became. Those aren't opposites, they're the same thing, seen from different distances. I kept the property. I hired a management company to handle it. Every quarter when I see the return on that investment, I think about my grandmother and I think, yes, this is right. This is what patience builds. And I never did take the referral case. I sent them to my colleague. I heard later that she found a partial solution, not everything they hoped for, but enough. I was glad, not because they deserved it, but because I no longer needed them not to have it. That's the difference, I think, between revenge and recovery. Revenge needs the other person to suffer. Recovery just needs you to be free. I'm free. I've thought a lot about what made that afternoon in my conference room feel the way it did. Not electric, not triumphant, just settled. Like a long equation that had finally balanced itself. The thing no one tells you about being taken from is how long the confusion lasts, not the anger. Anger is actually clarifying. The confusion is what lingers. You keep turning the situation over, trying to find the angle where you deserved it, where you misread something, where you were somehow complicit in what happened to you. My mother-in-law was very good at cultivating that confusion. She had a way of reframing every wrong thing as a misunderstanding, every theft as a difference in perspective. For a long time, I let that framing live in my head rent-free. What broke it, eventually, wasn't a conversation or a confrontation. It was just work. Consistent, accumulating, daily work. I showed up to my office when I didn't feel like it. I took cases I didn't find interesting because they paid the rent. I made decisions I wasn't sure about and learned from the ones that were wrong. There is something that happens to a person when they commit to building something, not performing the idea of building, but actually doing it day after day without an audience. And that something is a very quiet form of self-knowledge. You find out what you're made of, not in the dramatic moments, but in the ordinary ones. The Tuesday afternoons, when nothing is at stake, except whether you keep going. Priscilla knocked on my door once, about a year into the practice, and found me sitting at my desk staring at a wall. She asked if I was okay. I said I was just thinking. She nodded and left without making it strange. That's the kind of person she is, and I am grateful I found her. The people who show up quietly and don't make your struggles into a performance, those are the ones worth keeping. What my ex-husband's family never understood is that the choices they made didn't just hurt me, they educated me. Every document I had to trace, every account I had to find, every courtroom hallway I had to walk through with my head up, all of it became information. About how people hide things, about where the pressure points are in a financial dispute, about what it looks like when someone who has operated from a position of advantage suddenly doesn't have that advantage anymore. I didn't walk into that conference room with a plan to undo them. I walked in because my assistant said there were clients waiting, and clients were the entire point of everything I had built. The fact that those clients turned out to be them was not something I engineered. It was simply the consequence of parallel trajectories. Theirs going one direction, mine going another, both arriving at the same room on the same autumn afternoon. That's how cause and effect actually works in my experience. Not as punishment, not as reward, just as consequence. What you do accumulates. What they did accumulated too. We both ended up exactly where our choices had been leading us all along. I called my parents that evening not because I wanted to tell the story, but because I wanted to hear their voices. My mother said I sounded good. She was right. I was good, not because something had been taken from the people who took from me, but because I had finally stopped measuring my progress against their actions at all. That's the actual finish line. Not the moment they walked out of your office, not the moment you realize you won. The finish line is the moment their story stops being the story you tell about yourself. I got there. It took longer than I expected, and it was less dramatic than I might have imagined when I was sitting on that bathroom floor in the apartment I used to share with a man who didn't deserve what I gave him. But I got there, and Rosalind, who started as a young paralegal who didn't know yet what she was capable of, made partner last spring. We had dinner to celebrate, and she gave a small toast and said that watching me build the firm had taught her that the most important professional skill isn't any particular expertise, it's the willingness to stay in the room when the room is uncomfortable. She learned that from watching me, and I learned it from having no other choice. That's how it gets passed on. Not through speeches, not through advice, but through one person refusing to disappear, and another person close enough to see it happen,